It begins by defining the market correctly, right? And again, if we can't agree on how to best define a market, we're going to struggle at the very first step. What I find interesting is in certain methodologies like lean startup, for example, and others, they skip this step completely. There is no market definition step. And in fact, in lean startup, they're often asked to hypothesize the market, the customer's needs, and a product all at once, and then go test it in the marketplace. Well, we're much more efficient than that, in that we're going to solve the equation one step at a time. We're going to define the market before we define the needs and before we define the product concept, right? So the first step is define the market. Again, we define a market as a group of people, like Cortis did, the interventional cardiologist trying to restore blood flow in an artery, which is the job to be done. Or like Arm & Hammer did, dairy herdsmen who are trying to optimize dairy herd production. Or like Kroll Ontrack did, a legal team trying to discover information that supports or refutes a case. And you can see what we're doing here. We're defining a market as a very functional job that people are trying to get done that may be solved with hardware, software, or service products, or a combination of all. The job to be done is agnostic to technology. It's what the customer is trying to do. How you solve it is in the solution side of the equation. What this does, it establishes a stable focal point for long-term value creation, because these jobs remain stable over time, decades or longer in many cases. So when you're focusing on this job, it's your long-term vision, and your goal is to eventually get the job done perfectly with a single product, a single platform. There's another nice advantage about defining a market this way. It helps you identify adjacent markets, because we always hear about this. What are the adjacent markets we should enter? We want to grow from the core. Well, I always found this interesting, because if we can't decide on how we define a market, how do we define an adjacent market? It has to be adjacent to something, right? So if we define a market as a vertical, what is an adjacent market? Is that another vertical? Or if we define a market around a technology, what's an adjacent market? Is it another technology? Well, what we see here is that we define the core market as a group of people getting a job done, which means that there's two possibilities for adjacencies. One is we can help the current job executor get more jobs done. So for example, parents may be trying to pass on life lessons to children as the core job. Well, maybe they want to help them further their education. Maybe they want to help them lead a healthy life. There would be many other jobs that parents would be trying to get done for that same group of people. Or it could go in the other direction, where you find new job executors for the job that's being done. So we have parents trying to pass on life lessons to children. Well, what about grandparents? What about school teachers? What about coaches, and so on? So you can find other groups of people who are trying to do the same thing and expand in that direction. Then, of course, you have brand new markets, which are new executors and new jobs, which, of course, are much more difficult to enter because you don't have the technology or the capability to address that, whereas you do in either of those two adjacencies. One example I like to show that demonstrates this very nicely is what Uber has done. If you think about their markets, you have consumers who are trying to get transported to a destination as their core market, but this makes for a really interesting adjacent market, such as consumers who are trying to get another job done, get meals transported to a destination, which gave way to Uber Eats, which has been very successful. So thinking through this framework in this manner allows you to apply a different lens to the way you define a market and define your market adjacencies, so you can find other opportunities for growth. The next step comes in with the outcomes. These are the customer's needs, the measurable outcomes they use to measure success when they get a job done. And I like to think about these outcomes as a set of instructions that can be used by the organization to create more value for the customer. We think about these as a hierarchy where at a high level, you have the job to be done, you have job steps, and you have outcomes within each of these steps. And what we're trying to do here is help the customer get the job done better. And by better, what they mean is faster, more predictably, with a better result. So all the outcomes we capture relate to those different buckets, if you will. And let me show you an example. These outcomes are defined at a very granular level, and they come from surgeons who are trying to remove an anatomical structure surgically. And you can see the job steps that they go through, and you can see the outcomes underneath. And notice what they look like. They are not statements that are vague. In fact, they're the complete opposite. They are very specific. They're very granular. They're stable over time. They're unambiguous. They're solution agnostic or independent. And by studying the job to be done, you can come up with a set of needs that have all these unique criteria that make them very effective inputs into the innovation process. If you look at number 8, for example, minimize the time it takes to mobilize structures bound by adhesions that block access to the targeted structure. A very specific instruction from the surgeon to the innovation team, your team, to go create more value along that particular dimension. And as we see in most markets, there are maybe 8 to a dozen or more steps associated with the job the customer's trying to get done. And many of these metrics they use to measure success along each step of the way. This is what really makes outcome-driven innovation so powerful. What you're trying to do is to come up with a product that you know will win in the market before development begins. What that means is you have to know all these needs and which are unmet, and you have to come up with a solution that addresses those top unmet needs. Most companies, in contrast, will think of 1 or 2 unmet needs and create a product that's viewed more or less as a Me Too product with incremental improvement when the market is highly underserved along 20 different dimensions. The key is you have to discover all of these up front. The beauty of this too is these needs are stable over time. This is the same set of needs you can evaluate customers on today, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because not only does the job stay stable over time, but the way they measure success stays stable over time as well. What changes, of course, is what's important and how well satisfied they are based on different solutions that come to the market. We also see these outcomes have a very specific structure and for great reason. Like we say in the subheading here, these statements are knowable. They're not latent needs that can't be discovered, which in and of itself is a great advantage. You can talk to customers and go through the exercise and ask them how they're measuring success. What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to avoid as they go about and get the job done? And you can see these are formatted in a very specific way so that you can get very predictable results. Just like any process, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, and garbage in, garbage out. And we spent 30 years fine-tuning these statements so that we know if you capture statements in this manner and use them as inputs into the innovation process, that you'll be successful at the back end. The benefit here, 100 plus statements that inform your company's value creation efforts for years to come. So instead of taking 6 months to get a set of statements that are going to be useful for a few months, what you're doing here is you're spending weeks getting a set of statements that will be useful for years to come. It's a very valuable asset for the organization. Once we have those needs, we can figure out which are unmet. Now, we do this statistically by looking at all those needs, putting them into a survey, and then asking anywhere from 180 to 1,000 or more customers to tell us how important each need is and their level of satisfaction given the product that they're using today to get the job done. So, for example, we would ask, when executing this job step, how important is it to you that you're able to minimize the likelihood of damaging blood vessels along the pathway to the structure? And given the solution that you use today, and by the way, tell us what the solution that is so we have competitive data. Tell us how satisfied are you with your ability to achieve that particular outcome? So we can do this for all the outcomes. We plot out the results on a graph that we call the opportunity landscape. And you can see the importance and the satisfaction plotted out here. And we have one dot here, one outcome statement. And the reason that that's plotted right there is because 81% of the population has told us that that is either very or extremely important, yet only 30% is telling us it's very or extremely satisfied. And we use this algorithm up here to say if the need's very important and the difference between the importance and satisfaction is great, then we know that that need is unmet. And we know by how much as well. We do that via this opportunity score, which can take us anywhere from a score of 0 up to a score of 20, showing us not only what needs are unmet, but by what degree as well. So we can plot all these 100+ needs on the graphic and quickly figure out where the market's underserved and where customers may be willing to pay more to get the job done better, and where the market's overserved, where customers may be willing to pay less to get the job done worse. And with these insights, we now have the knowledge as to where to focus to get the job done better and or more cheaply. The benefit here, innovators know which of the 100+ needs are unmet and to what degree. Now, in many organizations, and 66% of this audience, there isn't agreement on what a need even is. Never mind what the needs are and which of those needs are unmet. But I've been in work that we've done, and we see that number get much worse as we ask those other questions. Is there agreement as to what the customer's needs are? Is there agreement as to which are unmet? And the answer is usually no, which of course presents a huge problem. This next step in the process is arguably one of the most important. And the reason I say that is the segmentation itself drives strategy. What we've learned over the years is that every market we've looked at, there's something unusual about it, and that customers don't agree on which needs are unmet. This is true across the board. We've done well over 1,000 studies. In every case, customers don't agree on which needs are unmet, meaning there are always segments of people with different unmet needs. Of course, that's a marketing 101 concept, but to try to find those segments historically has been extraordinarily difficult. We asked the question to the audience, is there agreement on the best way to segment a market? Well, most companies segment markets around some demographic classification scheme or use cases, personas, attitudes, behaviors, but all those are proxies for what you're really trying to do, because you're trying to discover those segments of people with different unmet needs, but you're not segmenting around unmet needs. And the reason you're not is because there isn't agreement on what a need is, what the needs are, and which needs are unmet. So this type of segmentation analysis cannot take place unless you've gone through those steps, and which in our view makes perfect sense, right? The best way to discover segments of people with different unmet needs is to segment around the unmet needs, not a proxy for those unmet needs. Here's how it's done. So at a very high level, just imagine that a third of a sample of people that were surveyed told you that outcomes 10, 20, and 30 were really important and unsatisfied. And another third of the sample says that outcomes 40, 50, and 60 are really important and unsatisfied. Yet another third think outcomes 70, 80, and 90 are really important and unsatisfied. Well, if that's the case, then we can use factor analysis and cluster analysis to quite literally put people in these segments based on the way they're rating these outcomes for importance and satisfaction. It's only after they're placed in these segments do we look at them to figure out who they are and build profiles for them. So we're profiling the segments after they're created. So in other words, we're not assuming a structure up front that says, oh, we're going to segment people into age group and we're going to just place people into these buckets based on this classification scheme. What we're saying is we're going to let the market tell us how it's naturally segmented. There are groups of people with different unmet needs. We just want to know who they are. And then once they're grouped together, we can go analyze them and figure out what makes them unique and different. And that helps us create what we can call like a needs-based persona, a persona that's not based on guesswork or phantom segments. It's based on data and analysis. It allows us to find segments of people in a single market that can behave much differently. This comes from a dental study that we did and filling a cavity. And you can see on the far right, 24% of the population in those purple, with those purple dots, the purple outcomes, are saying that we're highly underserved, versus over on the far left, 19% of the respondents are saying we're overserved. Right? So now what? Well, what we discovered after we've looked at these segments is that the people on the left were focused on patients that had healthy gums and just required a small filling. And in that instance, it was fairly easy to get the job done. On the other extreme, patients had unhealthy gums and required a large filling, which made it much harder to get the job done. And they were underserved along many of the outcomes associated with filling the cavity. So you can see the same dentist could be in multiple segments depending on the patient that they're doing the work on. The benefit of all this, authentic, real, actionable segmentation schemes become discoverable. Again, we call them hidden segments of opportunity because they're hidden from view unless you can actually segment around customer needs. And very few companies have the ability to do that. So this ability is clearly a distinct competitive advantage. And that leads us to the last step. Now that we know who we're serving, what their needs are, which are unmet, and if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, we can formulate our strategy. And it starts by formulating what we call the innovation strategy. We've taken two words that are vague and combining them together, making them more vague potentially, but let's define it for you. An innovation strategy is the selection of the segments and outcomes that you want to target to put you on the most efficient path to growth, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. And visually, it looks something like this. What we're saying is you want to know the fewest number of outcomes to focus on that's going to have the greatest positive impact on the largest customer population. So in other words, as you're looking across the gray areas, there's some outcomes that may be underserved in 100% of the market across all your segments that you've discovered. We call those high leverage opportunities because if you address them, they're going to impact 100% of the market. So again, they're unmet needs that impact 100% of the market. Once you've addressed all those high leverage opportunities, you can move on to the cross segment opportunities where you look for needs that are unmet across two or more of the segments. Beyond that, we can look at segment-specific opportunities, outcomes that are underserved in just one of the segments. What this allows you to do is to lay out that most efficient path to growth, vertically and horizontally. You can do this across segments. You can do this within a segment. This is the approach that OnTrack used when they entered the electronic evidence discovery market. What they did was they looked at the high leverage opportunities at first that cut across all the segments and then moved their way down into segment specific or cross segment and then segment specific opportunities. Again, following the most efficient path to growth. In this case here, we're showing 30 opportunities that you might identify. Well, how do you deploy them? And this is the second part of the strategy. Once you know what those needs are, you can work over a period of time, short-term, mid-term, long-term, to address all those needs in order to get the job done perfectly. And the way you do that is this. The first thing you do is you look at the opportunities, and if you already address them with your current product set, you can better position your current product without changing the product at all, just from a marketing standpoint, position it around those unmet needs and get a bump. You can then improve your existing products and address maybe 10 more of those needs with your current product set in order to get the job done better. Maybe you introduce new products that fill the gaps in the portfolio that get parts of the job done that weren't getting done before. And from there, you can make investments in R&D and M&A in order to invest in the future to eventually get the job done perfectly. This is exactly the path that Cordis took when they developed the angioplasty balloon product. For them, we uncovered a set of unmet needs totaling about 15 or so, and 2 or 3 of them were better addressed by their current products than were well addressed by their current products, more so than their competitors. So by repositioning their current product set, they got a small bump from about 1.5% market share to about 4% market share. They then introduced their 19 new angioplasty balloon products, all of which became number 1 or 2 in the marketplace and grew their market share from 2% to over 20%. In addition, they found one unmet outcome, which was to minimize the likelihood of restenosis or the recurrence of the blockage. And by focusing on that, they introduced a new product called the heart stent that became, in and of itself, a billion-dollar product within 2 years. They were the first to market with that product. And the story didn't stop there. They went on to invest in a patent portfolio around drug-eluting stents, which paid off very smartly years later when Guidant infringed on their patents and had to pay them, I believe the number was $600 million. So this is how to win at innovation over the long term, right? You understand the job the customer's trying to get done. You work towards helping them get that job done perfectly over time, and you are on the most efficient path to growth. The benefit of doing that, you're going to increase your chances of success quite dramatically. The way I like to think about this is, ask yourself, what are the chances that that Cordis team or any product team would just randomly come up with a solution that addresses those top unmet needs in the right order? And of course, the answer is near zero. The truth is, most companies, people don't agree on what a market is. They don't agree on how to segment the market. They don't agree on what a need even is. And this is why companies struggle to win at innovation. So with this different perspective, it changes everything. First off, you've got a new mindset, a common language for innovation, and a culture of innovation. You can strategically align the efforts of all these teams around a common understanding of unmet needs. And this is what I think is truly transformational. You're going from a place where teams don't agree on what a need is to a place where they all agree on what the customer's needs are, and they're ready to focus their creativity and energy on creating the best solutions to get the job done better. What's this result in? Big ideas, not incremental improvement, because you know all the outcomes that are unmet and you can tackle a dozen or more at a time, so you can overcome that incremental innovation hurdle. You can get there before anyone else because you're on the most efficient path to growth, and you can win each time because you know you're creating a solution that is going to win in the market, and you're proving that to yourself before you even enter the development process.